Elara Dracos felt the cold bite of the prison's metal walls against her back as she was shoved into the stark interrogation chamber. She stumbled, her shackles clinking against the floor, but caught herself with practiced precision. A sharp breath, then she stood tall, unwavering. The room around her was sterile, gleaming in the harsh light from the overhead panels. The walls were lined with sleek, alien technology, tools of the Empire that were designed to break those who dared resist. Across the room, Commander Varen stood, his expression unreadable, his posture rigid. The scar across his face gleamed like a brand, a constant reminder of his violent rise through the ranks. His black uniform was pressed perfectly, his boots polished until they shone like mirrors. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man of control. But Elara saw the cracks beneath that cold exterior. She'd seen them in men before. His confidence was brittle, and in his eyes, she could sense the beginning of doubt. "You're a hard one to crack, Captain," Varen said, his voice smooth but sharp, like the edge of a blade. He stepped closer, his boots echoing in the otherwise silent room. "It's impressive, really. But no one, not even you, can resist forever." Elara lifted her chin, her bruised face a mask of stoic defiance. She didn't answer, just stared at him with an intensity that made the commander pause. His eyes narrowed. "Most prisoners break after the first round of interrogations. But you..." Varen trailed off, watching her. "You're different." "That's what they all say," she replied, her voice steady, almost casual. "But I'm still here, aren't I?" Varen smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His expression grew colder, more calculating. "We'll see how long that lasts." He waved to the side, and two soldiers moved forward, carrying a strange, gleaming device. Elara's stomach tightened. She had seen it before, used it on others, even. The device was designed to overwhelm the senses, to flood the mind with unbearable sensations until the body begged for release. But Elara's resolve was not made of fragile flesh. The soldiers clamped her into a chair with metallic restraints that dug into her skin. Elara winced but said nothing. Varen stepped forward, his presence looming over her. "You can resist," he said, almost pityingly. "But the mind is fragile. And it will break." He pressed a button, and a low hum filled the room. Elara's vision blurred as an invasive energy washed over her, penetrating her mind like ice-cold water. The pain started as a slow pulse in her temples, then spread through her skull, gnawing at her senses. Her chest tightened, and every breath felt like a struggle. But Elara didn't scream. She gritted her teeth, her hands clenching into fists. She focused on the one thing that kept her grounded, the image of her people, scattered across the galaxy, fighting against the tyranny of the Empire. Every memory, every face, pushed her to keep going. Varen stood, watching her closely. His lips twisted into a small, satisfied smirk as her body twitched involuntarily, the pain intensifying. He took a step back, allowing her to endure the onslaught. Elara's body trembled, but she held firm. She'd been through worse. She'd survived worse. "You will break, eventually," Varen said, his voice quiet but final. "All of you do. But unlike your comrades, you won't be allowed to die. We need the information you carry." Elara's vision began to darken, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not now. Her heart raced, but her mind remained clear. She focused on her breath, drawing in slow, steady gasps despite the sharp pain that tore through her skull. The pain was nothing. Not compared to what they would do to her people if she failed. A sharp jolt of pain caused her to gasp, and for a brief second, she wondered if this was where it all ended. Her body was pushing against her will, but her resolve was still intact. She would not break. She would never break. As the energy subsided, the room returned to its dull hum. Sweat dripped down her face, her chest heaving. But her eyes never left Varen's. "I won't tell you anything," Elara said, her voice rough but unyielding. "You'll have to kill me first." Varen stared at her for a long moment, his smirk faltering slightly. He seemed to weigh her words, considering them with more care than she expected. Then, his gaze hardened once more. "We'll see how long you last, Captain," he said, his voice low. "The Empire's patience is infinite. Yours is not." With a sharp nod, he turned, signaling for the soldiers to remove her from the chair. As they began to drag her toward the holding cell, Elara couldn't help but think of her comrades. Her mission wasn't over yet. There was a plan in motion, one she'd set into place before her capture. And it was only a matter of time before her people would come for her. Elara wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol. And the Empire's greatest mistake was thinking they could break her. Elara's head throbbed in time with the steady pulse of the artificial lights above her. She had been dragged back to the cold, metallic cell, the shackles biting into her wrists. Each step felt like a punishment, the weight of her own body pressing down on her battered frame. Yet, through it all, her resolve remained unshaken. She slumped against the wall, closing her eyes to block out the brightness. Her body ached, but it was nothing compared to the fire inside her. The Empire could try to break her, but they would not succeed. From behind the reinforced door, she could hear the faint murmur of voices. Varen's voice, low and calculating. In the distant, clinical tones of Dr. Kellen, the Empire's torturer of choice. The scientist was obsessed with breaking people, not just physically, but mentally. He'd been the one to design the pain-inducing devices that had nearly incapacitated her. But Elara knew something the Empire didn't: humans were resilient. And this would not be the first time she had faced the impossible. The door slid open, and 2 guards entered, their heavy boots clanging on the steel floor. One of them grabbed her by the arm, yanking her upright. "You're wanted in the interrogation room," the soldier said gruffly. "Time to see how much more you can take." Elara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice soft but laced with venom. "When the rebellion finds you, you'll wish you never laid a hand on me." The soldier laughed, a short, humorless sound. "We've heard all the threats. Nothing new." He shoved her forward, not bothering with any more pleasantries. As they escorted her down the corridor, Elara couldn't help but notice the lack of security. Normally, the Empire would have doubled or tripled their guards, but today, they seemed overly confident. Was it because they believed she was already broken? Or did they underestimate the rebellion's ability to strike at the heart of their empire? Either way, she would use this to her advantage. They entered the interrogation room, and once again, she was seated in the same cold, unforgiving chair. The restraints were tightened around her arms and legs, leaving her no room to move. The room smelled of antiseptic, sterile and unnervingly clean, like the kind of place where human suffering was studied rather than alleviated. Varen was standing at the far side of the room, staring at a screen filled with data. Dr. Kellen was beside him, monitoring the information that flickered across the display. The man was always calm, always calculating, like a machine devoid of empathy. But Elara knew that even men like Kellen had weaknesses. Varen glanced at her, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "You've been silent long enough," he said, voice low, but still carrying that air of condescension. "We're done playing games, Captain." Elara didn't respond, refusing to give him the satisfaction of acknowledging his words. Instead, she focused on the tiny noises in the room, the hum of the machinery, the clicking of Varen's boots as he paced, the soft shuffle of Dr. Kellen's feet. It was all so mechanical, so controlled. That's how the Empire worked: precision, order, and the relentless pursuit of power. But they didn't understand humanity. Not the way she did. Varen finally turned away from her, walking toward Dr. Kellen. "Initiate the next phase," he ordered. The scientist nodded and activated a nearby console. A soft whirring sound filled the air, and Elara's heart skipped a beat. The machine in front of her hummed to life, sending a surge of electricity into the chair, buzzing through her body. Her muscles clenched involuntarily, the shock so intense that it felt like every nerve in her body was being torn apart. Pain. Excruciating, white-hot pain. But Elara did not scream. She would not give them the satisfaction. Instead, Her mind flashed to the faces of her comrades, Adrian, Lila, Max, and the countless others she had sworn to protect. She had made a promise to them, and she would keep it, no matter what it took. Through gritted teeth, she whispered, "You'll never win. Humanity doesn't break." Dr. Kellen's voice was almost mocking as he observed her response. Fascinating. She's holding out longer than expected. Varen turned, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. Increase the intensity. I want to see if she truly has the will to survive. Elara's body tensed as the shock levels increased. The pain became unbearable, flooding her senses, but still, she held her ground. The agony was nothing compared to the pride she felt knowing her comrades were out there, planning her rescue, preparing to strike back at the Empire. They had learned from her sacrifice. They had learned how to fight. As the device hummed, the thought of her people, united and strong, anchored her in the chaos of the moment. She knew they wouldn't abandon her. They never would. Just tell us." Varen's voice was low, strained, as if he was on the verge of losing his cool. "Where's the resistance base? Where are they hiding?" Elara's vision blurred, but she didn't falter. Her response came steady, unshakable, "You won't find them. The Empire might control entire sectors of the galaxy, but they didn't understand the depth of humanity's resolve. And no matter what they did to her, Elara knew this one truth: humanity would always rise." The door to the interrogation room opened again, but it wasn't another guard. It was something else, a sound, a shift in the air. Elara's pulse quickened. She had never heard it before, but she knew it instantly. Hope. The rebellion had come. The crackle of static burst through the intercom, followed by the low murmur of voices. Elara's heart skipped, her breath catching in her throat. She was still strapped into the chair, the remains of the electric shock lingering like a dull ache in her muscles, but her mind was already sharp, alive with possibility. Her eyes flicked toward the door, straining to make sense of the shift in the air. Varen and Dr. Kellen were still fixated on the data screens, the hum of the machines drowning out the sounds from the hallway. They didn't hear it. But Elara did. The sound of boots approaching, quick, light, and precise. Not the heavy clomping of the Empire's soldiers, but the unmistakable, disciplined pace of her people. A surge of adrenaline flooded her system, the pain momentarily forgotten. They were here. They had come for her. Varen glanced at the door, sensing something was off. His brow furrowed. "What is that sound?" he muttered to himself, taking a step forward. But before he could act, the door to the interrogation room burst open with a force that shook the walls. In the doorway stood a silhouette, tall and imposing, with a face half hidden beneath a dark helmet. For a moment, the room was silent. The guards at the door had no time to react. A single shot rang out, swift, precise. The soldier at the threshold crumpled to the floor. Elara's breath quickened, her pulse racing. She had been right. They were here. Before Varen could order a response, the mysterious figure moved with impossible speed, dispatching the other guards with a fluidity that spoke of years of combat training. The room had become a battlefield in an instant. Varen's eyes widened, confusion creeping across his face. "No!" Varen shouted, stepping back. His hand reached for his blaster, but the intruder was too fast. In a blur of motion, the helmeted figure threw a smoke grenade into the room. The air thickened with a choking fog, obscuring their movements. Elara twisted in her restraints, heart hammering in her chest. She had no time to waste. She was still bound to the chair, but there was no hesitation in her mind. Her people had come to free her, and she would not remain passive. The muffled sounds of combat reached her ears, crashes, the hiss of energy blasts, the grunt of soldiers hit by force. The smoke began to dissipate, and in the dimming light, Elara saw the figure moving toward her. The voice was familiar, and despite the distortion of the mask, she recognized it immediately. "Hang on, Captain," a voice rumbled from behind the helmet. A small device clicked, and Elara's restraints loosened. Her arms fell free, the weight of her body sagging slightly as the chair's restraints released. She pushed herself upright, her muscles sore but fueled by the urgency of the moment. Her legs were still weak, but she could move. And she would move. Move, the voice barked again, more urgently now. Without a second thought, Elara obeyed, her body surging into motion. She stumbled toward the door, the figure guiding her with practiced hands. The moment she crossed the threshold, the battle outside erupted in full force. Blaster fire flew past them as they ducked into the shadows, but Elara's focus was razor-sharp. She knew who the figure was. She had heard the name whispered among resistance fighters, seen the brief communications and the encrypted messages. Titan, a legend. A soldier whose reputation in the underground rebellion was as solid as the steel walls of the Empire's prison cells. Elara could hear Varen's voice growing distant, shouting orders, but it didn't matter. He wouldn't catch them. Not now. She moved faster, pulling the figure's cloak tighter around her body to shield from the view of patrolling guards. They reached a narrow corridor, the air pungent with the scent of disuse. Titan led her down a series of dark hallways, always taking turns, always staying ahead of the Empire's gaze. They finally reached a small, heavily shielded door at the end of a dead-end passage. Titan typed in a code, and the door slid open with a whisper of old mechanics. "After you," Titan said, gesturing for her to go first. Elara nodded and stepped through. The moment her feet crossed the threshold, she felt the familiar warmth of freedom. Outside, the pulse of a hidden engine could be heard, the escape ship was waiting. She hesitated only for a moment before she turned to Titan. "How did you?" "No time," Titan cut her off, his voice tense. "We don't have long before the Empire realizes we've breached their perimeter. They'll be coming for you, and they'll send everything they have." Elara felt her heart rate spike again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from the knowledge that this was her chance to strike back, not just for her survival, but for the survival of the Resistance. For humanity's freedom. The blast doors behind them clanged open. Titan was already moving, pushing her toward the ship. But before they could enter, the door to their escape route trembled with a violent shudder, and a loud, mechanical noise filled the air. The distinct sound of more Empire soldiers, many more than before, closing in fast. Titan paused for a second, looking at Elara. There was no panic, just a quiet determination. "We're almost there," he said. "Stay close, and we'll get you to safety." But Elara wasn't looking at the door anymore. Her gaze was fixed on the looming shadow of the ship, the symbol of hope and defiance, rising against the Empire's oppression. She couldn't let it end here. "Then let's go," she said, voice steady, her resolve sharpening. The escape was just beginning. And the fight for humanity's freedom? That had only just started. The cold vacuum of space pressed in around the hull of the Resistance ship, its engines purring softly as it cut through the galaxy's darkness. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Elara gripped the edge of the command console, her fingers white-knuckled, the raw memory of their close escape still pulsing in her veins. They had done it, slipped past the Empire's iron grip, but the fight was far from over. It was only just beginning. "Report," she said, her voice steady despite the chaotic storm brewing in her chest. Titan, seated beside her, his eyes scanning the digital map before them, was the first to respond. "We're clear for now. But they'll send a fleet after us the moment they realize you're gone. The Empire won't stop until you're dead." Elara didn't flinch at the blunt words. She had known this truth long before Titan had arrived. The Empire was relentless, a machine that crushed all rebellion beneath its boot. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She'd already been captured once. They'd tortured her, tried to break her, and failed. No. They won't. Her eyes locked onto the horizon, her pulse quickening with resolve. "We're going to make them regret ever taking me." Titan's lips twitched in something that resembled a smile. "You've got fire. I like that." The ship's comms flickered to life, and Dr. Kellen's voice crackled through. "Elara, you need to see this." Her stomach dropped. She knew what it was without needing to be told. She rose quickly, her boots clanking against the steel floor, and moved toward the small observation deck. Through the reinforced glass, the vastness of space stretched out before her, stars flickering like distant embers. And there, in the far reaches of the void, the Empire's flagship loomed, an enormous monstrosity of gleaming black steel, the Oblivion, the heart of the Empire's military might. Its weapon systems, deadly and untouchable, glinted in the fading light of the stars. "We'll never outrun it," Elara said quietly, her eyes narrowing. Titan appeared beside her, his face grim. "We don't need to outrun it. We need to destroy it." Elara turned to him, brows furrowing. "You're talking about attacking the flagship? With what?" "Your people's courage." He stepped forward, tapping a series of buttons on the console. The ship's display shifted, revealing a strategic map of the fleet's weak points. The Oblivion is powerful, yes. But it has vulnerabilities. Its weapons are focused on the front, leaving the rear exposed. If we can strike there. Elara's heart pounded. A strike to the heart of the Empire. It was insane, reckless even, but it might just work. They had no time for hesitation. Her people needed hope, needed a sign that they could fight back. This was it. This was their chance to turn the tide. "We'll need all hands on deck," she said, turning back to Titan. "You're sure you can get us close enough?" Titan nodded without hesitation. "It's a suicide mission. But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." She met his gaze. "Then let's not waste time. Rally the crew." As Titan moved to organize the team, Elara's mind raced. The plan was perilous. Even if they managed to breach the Empire's defenses, the flagship was a fortress. And the price of failure would be the end of everything, the end of the rebellion, the end of hope itself. But as the crew assembled in the war room, Elara saw something in their faces that steadied her resolve, determination. She wasn't leading a group of soldiers. She was leading a family, her family. And they would stand together, no matter the odds. "We go in fast, we hit them hard, and we don't stop until that ship is nothing but debris," Elara declared, her voice ringing with confidence. "The Empire has made a mistake. They thought they could break us. But they've only made us stronger." Titan, standing beside her, nodded. "This is it. No turning back now." Dr. Kellen, eyes intense, laid out the final strategy, marking the key targets on the map. "We'll need to disable their shields, breach the lower decks, and take out their weapon systems. If we do that, they won't be able to fire back. We'll have a shot." Elara's gaze flicked to the screen. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. There was no room for failure. With the Oblivion in their sights, they had a single shot to cripple the Empire's control over the galaxy, and she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. "Prepare for combat," Elara said, her voice steady, but inside, a fire burned brighter than ever. This was the moment. No more hiding. No more running. She had been a prisoner, a pawn in their cruel game. But now? Now she was the weapon. As the ship's engines roared to life and they accelerated toward their target, Elara took one last look at the faces around her. Every single person on this ship had their own reasons for fighting. But today, they would all fight together. And the Empire would never forget their names.